Could you please explain, this is for Dr. Jagan. Could you please explain how did you incorporate the ESG in the latest Dubai 2040 master plan?
Okay, thanks for the question. You should bear in mind that the 2040 Dubai master plan is an urban master plan. Like ESG, when you talk of ESG, it is articulating or setting say, reporting on or ESG is a non-financial disclosure of an entity or an organization which has certain activities or exposure to a sector. But when you talk of master plan 2040, it was meant to be a pure urban master plan, looking into how the economic activities, population are likely to unfold in the next 20 years, and what sort of carrying capacity or the services that Dubai as a city should be having in order to ensure the growth rate the years down the line. So while it is not possible to directly connect ESG to the urban master plan, there were few components that were addressed as a part of urban master plan, which is climate adaptation or climate mitigation, green areas, green energy, bicycle tracks, and nature-based solutions, few components of SDGs. For example, greener cities and better working conditions and things like that, they were carried forward in the development of the plan at certain stages so that they are reflected as a part of the plan. So if we cannot say, is there a ESG report for the urban master plan? It doesn't work that way. A plan is a plan, an aspiration of how we want Dubai urban area to be by 2040. So yes, certain climate related facts were factored in, but a direct comparison of ESG to urban master plan would not be appropriate. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Jagan. And one question just came in. Does supply chain or suppliers engaged in the software, as most of our emissions are based on them? So I think, Jan, it's for you.
Yes, regarding to supply chain, currently we are testing one model with Swedish pharma company that is actually trying to identify and track its supply chain. And as the smart head has the structure as it has, based on companies and regions, etc. And the basic element is one company. It also allows to track supply chain for companies for the specific disclosures or data that company needs to collect. So yes, it is possible to use our software for this purpose, and currently it is in the testing phase.
Okay, thanks, Jan. Bhavya, I understand you are also engaged in complete procurement and selling of the product. So do you have any say in what you have done to mitigate carbon emissions in your supply chain?
So we are, as I understand, as I mentioned in my presentation as well, it's early days and we're trying to develop our own methodology, but we're certainly trying to understand from the suppliers sourcing their data to understand their carbon footprint to begin with. In addition to that, we're also doing logistics planning. We are trying to find out the most efficient way of getting the product to the consumers. And often we are also going to be offering the choice to the consumer to actually go and buy the product locally than source internationally. So the site is going to give the consumer the choice of sourcing the same product by a local manufacturer supporting their local community, as opposed to sourcing the product from an international manufacturer. Now that might mean that the brand that we're talking about is different, but it will be the same use and the consumer will get the same benefit from that product in a more socially conscious or an environmentally conscious way. So that's really the strategy at the moment.
Okay. And Ms. Shivani, do you have something to add to this?
Yeah, I think that's the way to go, to kind of have the right processes internally to make sure that you know what type of data you're collecting. What I would like to add is that sometimes data collection can have errors as well. So when that happens from the reporting perspective, you have the ability, or that's what the right thing to do is, that in your next report you basically put the recalculations, etc. So keep that in mind, that for people who are just starting in this direction, don't stop because you don't have the full processes already in place. It's a lot of learning. All the companies go ahead and do that as well. They're all in the same situation. And if it is that you are trying to collect the data where some miscalculations happen, then report that in the next reporting period, and start by preparing some sort of process for it. Maybe start with your first tier suppliers and then move to your second tier suppliers, etc. So every company can kind of benefit from planning the activities in that manner.
Okay, thank you. And Dr. Jagan, you mentioned that there should be a chief sustainability officer who is directly reporting to the board. And we have an attendee asking, shouldn't it be directly under the HSE team where it can function more properly? So what do you think?
Earlier, sustainability, or the concept of sustainability, started with the environmental sustainability risks, and those firms that are more exposed to environmental damages, such as oil spills or whatever. So at some point of time, environment was purely under the framework of HSE, which continues to be even now. But when we talk of ESG, as I mentioned, it is going beyond environment. It is covering all sectors, say finance sector, building sector, transportation, industries, power. So it has gotten a much larger holistic view. And on top of it, we have social and governance. If you have governance, it's going to all the way to the how exactly the board and the group governs the material topics. It might be dispute resolution, it may be dignity of labor, it may be ethnicity, it may be equal opportunity or dispute resolution mechanism, or it could be society, which can perhaps look into we can talk of spills as a part of it, or recycling, or so the number of parameters or the topics that are currently discussed under ESG, irrespective of the framework, are quite wide, and it cannot be directly dealt by a more technically or specific targeted divisions such as HSC or EHS. If you're talking of board level representation, yeah, or HR or procurement, supply chain, so it is too big, and I think it has to be left to an entity which can direct and coordinate with all the other departments, all other stakeholders that are part of the ESG journey. If it has to be, if it have to work with NGOs, if you have to work with government, regulators, investors, vendors, customers, you cannot have EHS doing all that. So ideally, it should be unbiased department which knows what to do, or knows who would help in doing what it wants to, and then taking it forward. That's why I was quite vocal about the external experts or consultants or advisors as well, wherein that should be enough, that should be in such a way that it enhances the organization's capacity to own the ESG and lead to a journey, rather than giving the entire thing to an expert or an advisor to create a report. It should not work that way. If it does, that means there's something wrong, and we are trying to greenwash as a part of the, because the intent is something else. ESG would not have assumed this big proportion or a figure if it had not been driven by, as I said, the Paris Climate Deal, SDG, and the net zero targets, and everything else. So so in my view, I feel it would be bringing that an EHS under HSE would be less beneficial when comparing to our aspiration. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Jagan. So now we'll take the final question and we will end the program. So this is from Mr. Farooq. Any examples of KPI in G domain or mainly quantitative KPIs? So who would like to?
Can you read the question? Repeat the question, sorry.
Any examples of the KPI in G domain? He's referring to quantitative KPIs in G domain.
In G, what's a G domain? ESG, okay. See, governance is by default, it is not exactly quantitative per se as we see the energy, water, or whatever. But if you want to, basically, once you go through any published GRA reports or other ESG reports, you will find that it has got where G is there, it might have given a representation or a percentage or some sort of weight or a dispute resolution where some of them have been properly governed. It is not directly a quantitative estimate, but it will give you a sense of what has happened in that organization through the report.
Okay.
Just to share with you, you know, about a week back, the so-called most perceived green mobility or Tesla, it was brought out of S&P index because the data and the reports suggested that they have violated certain components of E, S, and G. On the E part, there was environmental pollution for which they had to pay fine. On the S part, there's something of giving unusually physically challenged task to a Black community, and when that is being questioned, it was retaliated with some sort of a different sort of a tone. So in all these three cases, Tesla was brought out of S&P index, but it's a different issue that Tesla did not care. But the governance on the G part, we'll know only by seeing the report and trying to understand the context. That's my view. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Jagan. Ms. Bhavya or Shivani?
Yeah, I would just like to add to one thing, and Farooq, thanks for the question. This is a very important question. Governance part is more and more highlighted, and let me come back to the GRI reporting and give you a couple of examples of the quantitative governance related KPIs or disclosures. For example, gender diversity in your governance, in your board. So that would be a quantitative KPI where you would have to report the number of males and the females in your governance, in your board, etc. Again, regional representation would be another quantitative KPI, but there's also a huge highlight on the qualitative KPIs. So again, for GRI reporting, but also for TCFD and for SASB reporting and what's coming up with ISSB, all of them are focusing on the KPIs directly of your board and the involvement of the board in actually putting together and meeting the sustainability performance. So there's a huge pressure now coming on the board to say, how are you meeting the sustainability performance? You're putting a lot of targets against different topics. What is the role of your board and the governance in your organization to actually really be able to meet? And is the remuneration and salary of the board directly proportionate to whether you're actually meeting those targets or not? So again, both examples of quantitative and qualitative KPIs in relation to governance.
So it's basically a top-down governance structure, basically in addition to female percentage.
Mostly it is, when it comes to quantitative information, it is about diversity with respect to gender diversity, respect to regional diversity, race diversity, etc. All of those components are more related to the governance information, because the more diverse your governance is going to be, the more productive the company becomes. And that's kind of the thinking behind it.
Thanks, Shivani. Jan, Martin, and Bhavya, do you have anything to add? Or
I think that's already been captured, but just
Okay.
one small point, that yes, obviously, as we grow and at the initial stages, the view we've taken is to keep the KPIs or the reporting parameters fairly small and restrict our domain, because we don't want to spread ourselves thin and start incurring ESG capex when we are not really resourced to do that. But I think at the early stages, it will be around executive compensation, and while the company is in its growth phase, and as we expand, there will be more parameters. We do certainly gender diversity, inclusivity is the very first one on our radar, and then we will be extending it to other governance-related KPIs as we grow. But as I said, it's going to be expanding the parameters as we grow and start taking responsibility and becoming more and more accountable.
Thank you, Ms. Bhavya.
Also would like to add, as Shivani mentioned, governance is becoming more and more important topic, and related to SmartHead, it provides a lot of space for company to express its attitude towards the sustainability, whether it is a top leadership or management of the company, and also approach towards the operations and driving company itself. Yes. Also from this perspective, SmartHead helps companies to deliver this message so stakeholders can understand it better and then eventually also appreciate it and build rapport with the company.